school. Many times there will be people who will walk in and out of our lives with different situations, circumstances, problems, and they will turn to us for help. And the question is, what would be the most appropriate approach to their trying times? What would be the best way to respond? We have something called sympathy. Sympathy means that, although I cannot relate to your situation or your dilemma, I can most certainly give my approval that the position that you are in is difficult. Sympathy means that I can use all types of appeasing words to make a person feel better. But then there's something on a much greater level than sympathy, and that's something called empathy. Empathy means that I can relate to this person's situation because once upon a time I was facing his challenge. The power of empathy is the power of giving people hope. Because if I was able to get through this situation in my life and this challenge, so can you. Every character within our Torah is presented to us by their qualities. And just by the way they dealt with different challenges, we could tell what kind of personality they truly were. For instance, we have a man by the name of Noach. And everyone would agree with me that Noach was a tzaddik. However, perhaps there are rabbis who will come along and tell us that Noach was a selfish tzaddik. Because although he did save himself and his generation, although he saved himself and his family, he neglected the rest of the generation. Hence Noach was a selfish tzaddik. And then we learn about Avraham Avinu. And although everyone would say, if there's one word to describe Avraham, all hands down, everybody would agree with me, it would be kindness, hospitality. He's a person who loves to perform chesed. But then there are those rabbis who analyze the story of Avraham, and they will tell us that Avraham, kindness was over-exaggerated, a bit overdone, misplaced kindness. And the proof of the pudding is, when Avraham goes and he fights the war with the 5 kings against the 4 kings to go and save his nephew Lot, he's going to save one person. But how many people is he putting at stake? How many people is he putting into jeopardy? Because if Avraham does not come out of there alive, there's no me, there's no you, there's no Am Yisrael. Hence, Avraham's kindness was overdone. It was misplaced kindness. And then we learn about Yitzhak and Yaakov, Givurash and Emut. We learn about all the Shvatim, all the 12 tribes, and we find that each tribe had his own special personality, his own quality. And then we open up a new book, and we're introduced to a whole different character. A man whose name is mentioned throughout the entire Torah more than anybody else's. The one to bring the salvation to the Jewish people. The one to lead the Exodus. And this person is no other than Moshe Rabbeinu. And the question we must ask ourselves is, what qualities did Moshe possess? What was so special about Moshe? And maybe if we could pick up on the ingredients, the ki midah of Moshe, and we could emulate it, maybe we could become great as well. Amen. Can I have the Chumash? Not over yet. The pasuk says, "Vayigdal hayeled," and the child grew up, referring to Moshe, implying that Moshe grew up. Now we know that the Torah will never tell us something that's obvious. The Torah will never tell us something that's self-explanatory. What is the Torah coming to tell us when it's saying Vayigdal hayeled and Moshe grew up? Everybody at a certain point in their life graduates and matures from being a child to an adult, unless the Torah is conveying to us a whole different message. And the Torah is telling us that Moshe took upon himself these characteristics of an adult. You see, the difference between a child and an adult is, a child is a very selfish creature. A child does not take other people into consideration. An adult, on the other hand, understands that the world does not revolve around him. And therefore it says, Vayigdal hayeled, Moshe grew up. He took upon himself this character of this character trait of an adult. Now listen to the next pasuk. The pasuk says, Vayetze lachav vayar b'sivlotam. Moshe sees that the Jews are suffering, and he goes out of the palace, and the Midrash says he had a golden scepter, and he pulled out his golden scepter, and next thing he knows, he's helping this person with his burden, another person with the bricks, another person with the cement, and he goes from being the prince of Egypt to another slave laborer on the field. Where most of us would have simply just closed the shades and just turned away, Moshe gets up, he stands up, and he makes action. One rabbi asked good when he asked, why is it that Moshe had to go out to the field? So he helped 3 people, did he make much of a difference? And he said good when he said, because for Moshe it was not enough to sympathize. For Moshe, he had to feel his brother's pain, and then he could empathize. But that's just the first scenario. The second scenario, the pasuk says he goes out and he finds an Egyptian man beating down a Jew. And whether he used the 42-letter name of God or he uses physical strength, the Egyptian collapses and the ground swallows him up. and Moshe makes a run for it. So we're slowly starting to see the ingredients of what made Moshe a leader. He's a person who sympathizes, a person who helps, a person who empathizes. But look at this. The pasuk goes on and it tells us, he goes out, now he sees two Jews fighting. And he goes ahead and he comes up to them and he says, it's not enough that we have enough problems outside of our nation, that we have to make problems within our people. And these two men turn to him and they say, are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian the day before? And at that point, Moshe realizes that they're onto him. They go and they report him to the authorities. Paro gets his hands on Moshe, and just when they're about to take the sword and slaughter Moshe's neck, it says that God turns Moshe's neck into, the Midrash says that God turned Moshe's neck into marble, and the sword bounced off back to the Egyptian who was trying to kill him, the executor, and Moshe again saw the coast was clear and he made a run for it. So these are the select instances handpicked by God to tell us what Moshe was really all about. And now Moshe ends up in Midian, and he finds the 7 daughters of Yitro trying to get water from the well. And as he's trying to get water, they're trying to get water from the well. It says that the shepherds would see that they were weaker than them. They were girls after all. Yitro had no sons to go and send to do this job for him. And they will come along and they will try to get water. As soon as they will do that, the shepherds will come and they will skip them in line. They will push them out of the way. And once the next shepherd comes, again he pushes them out of the way. And that day, to their convenience, Moshe appears in Midian. And it says that day the shepherds were so vicious and so aggressive, they literally took the daughters of Yitro and they threw them inside the well. And Moshe stands up and he saves the daughters of Yitro from the well. It's very interesting to note, because we saw somewhere else in the story of Shemot where someone is drowning and someone else comes along and saves them. Oh, that's the story where Moshe is placed on the Nile and is flowing down the river. Comes along Batya and saves him. And if it wasn't for Batya, he would never be saved. So again, Moshe is coming to emphasize with someone else, because he knows how that feels when you're in such a situation. So he goes from being a referee in Egypt to a lifeguard here in Midian. And now he becomes a worker for Yitro, and he's tending to the flock. As he's walking back from feeding them and giving them water, he notices that one of the sheep is missing, and he runs back and he notices that one sheep is still taking water from the river. Now most people at this point will kick the sheep, they will drag him to the rest of the flock, and they would say, I gave you enough time, there's no reason why you're still here. But Moshe gets on his knees, he starts apologizing to the sheep. All of a sudden, he becomes a psychologist for sheep, so now he could add another thing to his profile. He went from being a referee to a lifeguard, and now he's a psychologist for sheep. And he brings the sheep to the rest of the flock. So God says, it's one thing if you're commiserating with people, but to come to a point where you're starting to empathize with an animal, this is a whole different level. And this is the leader I want for Am Yisrael. Now let's take a look. Moshe comes out of the palace, he steps out, and he starts working with the people to empathize. The second day he goes out and he sees an Egyptian beating a Jew, and he stands up again. The third day he goes out and he sees two Jews fighting. He cannot hold himself back, he must stand up. He could have said in Midian, I'm just a tourist here, why should I get involved? You can't let everything get to your heart. And again he goes ahead and he stands up for what's right. And here he's empathizing with a sheep. What is the common denominator between all these events? The answer is really one answer. It's really one word. He's constantly commiserating with people. Commiserating means he feels their misery. His empathy. He cannot go a day without empathizing and sympathizing with somebody else. I think I have a story that could bring this message straight home. We all heard of Napoleon. Napoleon was a great emperor, and he was very successful and victorious in all his battles. And he felt that he could take on the challenge of fighting two wars at once, a two-front war. And so, to his disappointment, he realized he started to lose, and he started running for his life. And as he's running, he realizes that the soldiers are onto him, and he runs into a farm. And he tells the farm that, please save my life, hide me, so when they come, they can't find me. And if you save my life, I promise you, a year from now, when I regain my status, I will reward you. And this farmer says, come with me. He brings him to the barn, he puts him under a whole haystack, and Napoleon is hiding in there. And come these soldiers, and they're looking and they're beseeching the entire farm, and they find the farm and they say, tell us, where is Napoleon? And he says, I don't know what you're talking about. So they say, there's no way he could have run. He must be here. And if we find him in your territory, not only are we going to hang him, but we're going to hang you with him. And they start looking all over. They couldn't find him until one of the soldiers said, hey, we never looked in that barn where Napoleon was in reality there. And they go inside there and they find a whole haystack, and they're looking through the haystack, they can't find him. And he's hiding there. He knows if he makes one peep, they're going to kill him and they're going to drag him out of there. And that'll be the end of him. And they start taking pitchforks and they start poking him from every side. They say, if he's in there, he'll make some noise, we'll drag him out, we'll kill him. For an hour, they were poking from every side, but he didn't make any noise. And finally, they said he must be here. He's not. Either he's dead by now. We killed him. We got him, or he escaped. And so they left. And Napoleon sticks out his head. He runs out. He goes back to France. He regains his position as Napoleon the Great. And exactly a year later, just as he promised, he calls up the farmer and he tells the farmer, "I want to ask you, what is it that you want? As a man of my word, I got to tell you, whatever it is, I will give it to you." So the farmer says, "There's not much I could ask you for, but there's one thing that makes me very curious to know. How did it feel when you were under all that haystack? Do you feel like you're about to die?" So Napoleon turns to him and he says, "I gave you the opportunity to ask me for whatever you want, and you remind me of the most degrading moment of my life. Instead of rewarding you, I'm going to punish you." And he takes this man, this farmer, and he brings him to the courtyard. They put him on a stool, and they put a noose around his neck. And he says, "When we're going to count from 10 to 0, once we hit 0, we're going to hang him." And they're counting 10, 9, 8, 3, 2, 1. Just when he's about to say 0, Napoleon screams, "Stop!" He walks up to this farmer and he says, "You wanted to know how I felt whenever I was under all that haystack? This is how I felt. Because I knew if I would have tried to explain it to you, you would have never understood what I went through until you didn't go through it yourself." That's what empathy is all about. You know, in America, we have all types of courts, and we have all types of justices, and we have something called corrective justice, and we have all types of different justices, but there's one justice that you will never find throughout the globe, and that's something called empathic justice. Empathic justice is something the Torah looks out for. I'll give you an example. We have a halakha, a rule of a slave. If a slave becomes, how does a slave become an eved? How does a person become a slave? He steals something that doesn't belong to him, and they catch him red-handed. If they catch him red-handed, they say to him, "Look, you have to pay up whatever you stole." He says, "I can't pay up because I spend it all." So they say, "You can't pay it up? Go ahead. We're going to make you a slave. You're gonna work it off for 7 years." He becomes a slave. Now listen to the highlight of the case. If he enters slavery without a wife and kids, then he leaves slavery without a wife and kids. Meaning, if he had a wife and kids before he entered slavery, so he could take his wife and kids out of there. But if in the process of being a slave, they gave him a wife and he had kids with her, when he leaves slavery, he cannot take them out. Now, 7 years pass, he tells his wife and he says, "Okay, let's go. Are you ready? Ready to pack out?" And the master says, "Where do you think you're going? They're staying with me. I gave them to you." So now, why can't he take them out? Why can't he take out his kids and his wife with them? You know the answer is? Because criminals who enter jail come out hardened criminals. So we say, this man is going to come out of jail, is going to say, "Last time I stole and they caught me. This time I'm going to steal. I want to make sure that they're never going to catch me." So we say, the Torah is looking out for this man to discipline him. And they're saying, obviously you don't know how it feels when something is being taken away from you. We didn't make you a slave for all these years so you come out there and continue stealing. We want you to learn your lesson, so we take something away from him. And next time he even thinks about stealing, he'll think twice. And he'll say, "I know how that feels, because once upon a time, somebody took something very precious away from me." I understood this law could apply to a slave, but I never understood that it could go to an extreme where it could even apply to an animal. The Torah says that when a shochet is going to slaughter an animal, he has to feel the knife to feel if there's any ridges along the way. And if he feels there's any nicks, then he knows that it's not going to be a kosher shechidah. Now the question is, why can't he just look at it? Why does he have to feel it? Because if he just looks at it, he's not feeling it, then he's not feeling what the animal's going to go through. Hence, we have to make sure that he feels it before he goes ahead and he goes ahead and he slaughters the animal, because he's so desensitized. He's always slaughtering. At some point, he's so insensitive to the animal. We have to make sure he gains back this state of sensitivity. The Torah says you cannot leave an ox and a donkey on the same field. And the explanation given that by the Dalat Zekinim says the reason is because the difference between an ox and a donkey is an ox chews its cud, it regurgitates its food. And after a donkey and an ox are working together after some time, what will end up happening is that the donkey is going to be working and he's going to turn around and see that the ox is chewing. It's a cow. And he's going to say, "Look at this cow, literally. I'm sitting here busting my tail, literally, while he's working and he's enjoying himself. He's having lunch. I didn't even get to lunch yet." He doesn't go and explain to this donkey that this guy over here, this cow, is regurgitating its food, chewing its cud. He'll never understand you. And so, to show a certain sensitivity towards the donkey, we make sure we don't leave him in the same field as the ox. And I think that this case could even go so far as you could sympathize with the dead. Because when a person dies, we mourn for him for 12 months. And for 12 months, we cannot go to weddings, we cannot go on vacation. So I asked myself, why is it that 12 months? Why isn't that 2 years? Why isn't that 10 years? What's with the 12 months? Why is it 1 year? We know that after a person goes to heaven, he has to go through a trial, and then he goes to heaven. And then he has his Olam Haba, his Halik of Gan Eden. But before he gets there, he has to go through, sometimes he has to go to 12 months. The most person could be in Gehinnom is for 12 months. He has to go through a whole process. So those 12 months, he's nervous. He doesn't know where he's going to end up. He's going to go, which part of Gehinnom is he going to get? Which part of Gan Eden is he going to get? So to sympathize in this world, we say, how can I go to a wedding if this person in the next world is suffering? So I have to, in this world, put myself in a position where I'm uncomfortable because he's uncomfortable up there as well. You know, this is not a trait that's only found from Moshe. You know, we have big rabbis. And I'll leave you off with this. We have big rabbis who also mastered this trait. I don't know if this is something that came naturally to them or they worked on it, but there's many stories of how there was once a rabbi who went ahead and he was collecting tzedakah. And he comes and knocks on a rich man's door. And it was in the middle of January, it was freezing, mid-zero. And he comes along and he starts knocking at this man's door, and the guy comes out, he says, Rabbi, came for a check, here you go. He says, wait, before you give me a check, I don't want a check, I just want to know how your day is going. And he pulls him out of the house, and he starts talking to him for 20 minutes. And he says, why are you keeping me for 20 minutes? Just tell me what you want. He says, I'll tell you what I want the check. So he says, why couldn't you tell me this from the beginning? He says, because I'm collecting for people who don't have homes. They don't have a place to stay, they don't have a place to sleep. You live in a house where there's a heater. They don't sleep on the benches in the park. And therefore I wanted to make sure you know how they feel by standing here outside with me in the cold for 20 minutes. Now you can give me a fair check. That's what empathy is. There was once a rabbi who went to a hospital. He went to visit a sick person. And as he's in the hospital, he sees the person who's suffering, is connected to all types of tubes and wires and IV. And he goes home and he's sleeping that night and he can't fall asleep and he's twisting and he's turning and he realizes how comfortable it is to twist and turn in bed. And he says to himself, wow, look how enjoyable it is to twist, to turn. This guy is connected to IV, he cannot do that. So the next day he goes again, this time to sympathize with him, to show him, I understand what you're going through. It must be difficult for you when you're laying in that bed and you cannot move. We have a halakha called Bikur Cholim. Bikur Cholim means visiting the sick. Bikur Cholim is plural. We don't have a halakha called Bikur Choleh. Whether you're visiting one person or two people, the mitzvah is always called Bikur Cholim. Now, I saw an explanation given that the reason is because the person who you're visiting is not the only sick person. His family is also suffering along with him. Who's going to pay for the kids' tuition? Who is going to bring the kids to school? Who's going to make the carpool? And therefore, you're not just sympathizing with the sick person, but everyone else who's sick around him, his wife, his kids. Hence, it's Bikur Cholim, it's plural. But I was thinking, what if he has no family? What if he has nobody there? So they know what the mitzvah is called? It's still called Bikur Cholim. Because you know who else is suffering? You should be suffering with him. You should come to a point where you're not just sympathizing with him, but you're empathizing with him. You could feel his pain to such an extent. And now maybe I could take you back to where we ended off with Moshe Rabbeinu. As he's walking back from the field with the sheep, God appears to him. And the Torah says that God appeared to Moshe in the burning bush, and Moshe saw, and Moshe turned around. But the rabbis say, don't read this pasuk, and God appeared to Moshe by the burning bush, and Moshe turned around. Rather read it, and God appeared to Moshe because Moshe turned around. Because he turned around and he looked at the other people suffering, he didn't just walk straight and close his eyes and close the shades. Moshe was a person who would look out and to see how he could help, even if he could not necessarily understand what they were going through, but at least to come to a point where he could somehow sympathize with them. And this is why Moshe sees God in a burning bush. Why didn't he appear to him in lush fields? I don't know, with some firecrackers over there. Why did he appear to him in the burning bush? Because God says, even I empathize with the people. Even I put myself in a position where I'm not so comfortable, because how could I be sitting in heaven on my throne if the Jews are suffering in Egypt? So this is a character trait that even God possesses. So may we emulate the big rabbis, may we emulate Moshe, and most of all, Hashem, and become the compassionate people that we came to this world to become. Thank you for listening.
Amen.